something like that. Anyway, it's good to hear you all. We're talking, of course, about, well, I mean, how has everyone been? How has summer been?
Summer is always perfect.
Yeah, I know, but how was summer? How is this new sort of, I don't know, autumn season and everything else? How are you guys doing?
Summer is perfect, especially not be in Moscow on that time.
Oh, okay.
I spent some time in Greece, and is a better place to be in summer than in Moscow, because there is close to autumn now. It's near 15 degrees.
Okay, so you guys are completely in autumn in that sense.
Yes, in Moscow, yes. And rain sometimes. So.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So rain in Moscow. What about in Samara? Elia?
The same in Samara, especially today. The wind is hard, and the weather is wet. Today, the whole day was raining, stop and raining, really awful, especially after hot summer or after sunny days. I know it was very difficult to enjoy it, although of course it is fresh, and I don't know, it's after hot summer, it is very pleasant to feel some fresh wind, but when it is cold, I don't like when it is cold.
All right. Well, that's understandable and that's fair. I don't know. I'm kind of, I guess, lucky because it's still kind of warm. It's not really all that autumn yet. But oh my goodness. We are talking about these predictions for the future. So, Denise, I got that text from you. Elia, have you thought at all about these predictions for the future?
How is it called in English? Двоечница?
Oh, yeah, D student to D plus student, maybe, I guess you could call it. But all right, that's okay.
About me.
Okay. All right. But Denise, I mean, your sort of thing, you're saying, yeah, it's hard to kind of put that all into words. It's kind of hard to make the same sort of thing, but interesting piece that you've written there. I think we should just get started about first defining this future. And the question number one, first question is, what do you define as the future? Denise, when you hear the word future, what do you understand future to be?
Future is so basic concept, so it's hard to describe it and not to say some synonymic phrases like things to come or something like this. So future is probably some change we await, some process will rise, not now but after now, some changes. Because if nothing changed, it's hard to split future from now.
Okay, so when you think of future, you're thinking of something specifically that is not now, that is not the past. It's what will come in that sense.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Elia, what about you? What do you define as the future? What is your feeling about it?
In the future, it is something that will happen sometimes later.
Okay, so you're also going with the same thing as Denise. I mean, that's, I guess, the basic sort of definition of what the future is, right? What comes after now. I think when I think about the future, it's a little more complicated in that there are a lot of things that I almost feel like we are developing now in the present that are somehow already the future, which is maybe a bit kind of, I don't know if it's a psychological thing or if it's a philosophical way to look at it. But I think that somehow when we look at so much of the technology that is being used today, but not just being used, but being developed, but being enhanced, this all kind of somehow transcends that barrier, that now and future barrier. And it's, again, maybe a bit of a philosophical sort of way to look at it, but I think that nowadays, more than ever before in the history of humanity, do we see how fine that line between now and future is. I mean, when we have computers and machines that are able to advance, so quickly that we can't even keep up with them, I think that that is a really good indication that that line is very, very thin, if not breaking down altogether. But that's just my sort of thing. But of course, future is what comes, and it will be very interesting to see what comes. So that's what we were going to be talking about today. What are your feelings on the idea of time travel, Elia?
It's the thing which I can't understand. So yes, I saw lots of fiction movies, and it is fantastic, and maybe we wish, but I really can't understand how could it be possible. I can't understand.
It doesn't matter if it's possible or not. It's like just the idea of it itself, the concept of it. I mean, we of course are familiar with it from different works of science fiction, but the whole idea of being able to travel through time, to travel to the past, to travel to the future, to go back and forth. I mean, what are your feelings on that? Is it something that you feel is interesting? Is it something that, we shouldn't even be thinking about? What do you think?
I think it's absolutely impossible. From, I don't know, from my point of view, if it would be possible, then the future will be not the future. And if you will travel there, so it will be present. And what's the sense of that future, which is not future? So I can't understand the whole idea of that. That's why it is difficult for me to decide. I think it is absolutely impossible, because if we could do that, of course it would influence the past and will change everything. So I can't understand just the whole idea. That's why I don't know what to say.
All right, that's a fair answer. It's a fair answer. Denise, what about you? What are your feelings about time travel?
It's a very curious idea, and of course, this concept is very interesting, and there is many fiction or computer games about traveling, especially traveling from past and changing, and creation of alternative history, alternative branches of some process. But really, seems traveling in past is impossible. According current science knowledges. But traveling in future is possible, and in if you use geolocation in your smartphone, you use one of the time shift effects, because satellites in the Earth orbit have a rather big speed, and its effect on very small timer changes, which helps geoposition system to define distances and to define position as a result. So I think after appearing some very fast rocket engines, we meet a situation where some people's return back in really in future, because traveling on relative on very big speed cause more faster time on the spaceship. So on such viewpoint, traveling in future is possible.
Okay, you lost me a bit there, Denise. I mean, it's kind of
Yes,
maybe
and
a bit too like what? Okay,
some
but yeah.
sometimes I think that it's very interesting thing trying to look to the world with, for example, 10 years time shift. Sleep 10 years, then travel for a few months, and then sleep 10 years again. It's a very, I think, curious thing to look yourself how world changes, how a process, some social process grows in a very big speed.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean that's interesting sort of way to look at it. I don't know. I think about this whole time travel thing. I mean, I was watching what was it, Back to the Future, which is probably the time travel movie, right? Probably, I don't know, arguably the most popular. You can take other classics that deal with time travel, of course, but they're not quite well. Yeah, I think that this one is definitely a defining sort of characteristic of at least our generation. And so, I was watching this the other day on the airplane of all places. But yeah, I mean, you think about it, and there's so many questions. I think it gets back to what Elia was saying. It's just not possible or something like this. And this is my sort of way of looking at it. There's so many questions. How? And I think it's something that intrigues us as humans, to try to understand how this is possible. Is that sort of thing possible? There are a lot of books, a lot of movies that deal with different possible ways that this is something that can happen. We don't know, of course, of anything like that that's possible. It's science fiction, right? And if it was science fact, well, we're not aware of it being science fact yet. And even if it was possible, maybe someone in the future or in the past has somehow, time traveled themselves to prevent us from knowing this. You don't know. Anything is possible, right? Anything is possible. So many questions, I think, is what it gets down to. So my feelings are, yes, just that of question and speculation. Next question. Why do you think that people try to predict the future? I mean, if we look at Nostradamus, if we look at, I don't know, psychics or soothsayers or, I don't know, just maybe regular speculators who are bidding on sporting events. I mean, why do you think that people try to do this? Why do people try to predict the future? What do you think, Denise?
It's a question for me.
Yes, for you, Denise.
Okay. So first, it's a very curious thing because we know what was in past partially, we know what happens around us, and the good questions, what will be a result of the process around us. On the other side, some biologists think that prediction abilities is one of the cause why human brain appears. Because it was important to predict some relations, social relations, predict results of hunting or results of other process. So it's a part of human nature. And on third side, it's rather important to find a better strategy, what thing to study, what profession to choose, or something. It's rather useful, and some right predictions. It's very utilizable thing. I don't know if it's right.
Is an advisable thing?
It's possible to use results of such right predictions. If you choose a good profession, it helps you to be have more free time, to have a bigger salary, to get more abilities. For example.
Oh, sorry. I'm like clicking the wrong button. You're talking about what? About just making the right decisions.
Yes.
So like decision making. Okay. Yeah. So I guess, I mean, maybe part of what we define as decision making entails somehow making predictions about the future or assumptions about the future. So I guess that's an interesting point you make, Denise. It's like what we like what we want to define ourselves, we want to see ourselves when it comes to success and what have you. That's maybe part of a reason why we want to predict the future. That's an interesting thing, very interesting thing. And what do you think? Why do you think that people try to predict the future?
I quite agree with Denise. I think that people mostly want to predict the future because they want to be successful. They want to make best decisions and avoid mistakes. So that's, I think, they want to predict future. It's the wish to balance, to keep the balance, to catch that balance between and fear and fear of making mistakes. So I think that you want to avoid mistakes. You want to um, make your best choice, best decision, and to win. To be the first, the cleverest, and um, the I don't know, wise, the most wise, the wisest.
The wisest.
Wisest, yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, good. Good. I I think about how people, think about the future, want to predict the future. And I'm going to give a different sort of answer because both yours, Elda and Denise, you are kind of more on the sort of, we want to be successful. We want to find that place for ourselves. And that's why we look and try to predict the future. I don't know. I think it's almost like people are guilty, if that makes sense. People are guilty of not wanting to live now, right? And this is something, if you maybe get into maybe more Eastern philosophy or the sort of like yoga kind of lifestyle, that there's so much importance on not focusing on what comes, not focusing on what is, but what was, but focusing on what is, right? And I think that sometimes it is much easier to speculate about what will be than to look at ourselves in the moment where we are now and to figure out what is and to deal with what is. So I think that in certain respects, mankind's look towards the future, these looks at predictions or these looks at, trying to find a good place, like you were saying, in the future, choosing the right job and everything else. It's, in some ways, yes, it's important for us to focus on what we're doing now. But in other ways, I think that oftentimes it's almost used as an excuse to not do everything that could be done now for the sake of now. So maybe it's, again, more of a kind of a philosophical or psychological way to look at all this, but I think it's interesting. I think it's very interesting that we are all guilty as people of I don't know if guilty is even the right word. We all think about the future. It's just kind of, what are those things that we do? I seriously wonder, do animals think about the future? Is that something that is reserved to just us humans? I don't know. We can't ask to find out. Does anyone know? Has anyone ever heard about any research done on the ability of animals to sense the future?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it's a growth of brain. One of the goal of growth, complexity of brain. It's a different modeling mechanism. Because it's very important to animals, of course, to modeling some social relations, to modeling some unpredictable situations. Like, is it good goals for hunting, or is some thing you should to afraid or avoid? So this is very important mechanism, and it's appears
this whole
even for
concept
animals.
of mental time, but that's, for the past, right? It's like based upon what you remember. That's a different sort of thing. Are they able to? This is a very kind of open-ended question here because we.
Yes, it's not looks like to human because we can describe this. We can create some concepts to describe it, to discuss about it. Animals can do this. But some simple modeling, some simple predictions in shorter time, it's possible. And as I remember, there was some investigations, some experiments about chimps and even for some social animals like wolves. It's limited, but them have ability to predict some situations.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it really is interesting. I think that kind of leads to the next question quite well, actually. What do you think are the advantages of looking ahead to the future? I mean, we talked here, Denise said, okay, we're talking about the animals and everything else. We're talking about how, it's a matter of memory, it's about, kind of protection and everything like that. But what do you think are the advantages that we have as humans of looking ahead to the future? Let's start with you, Elliot. What do you think?
I think it is very useful just and not to look into the future, but just to predict some situations. It can be interesting, and I think it depends on intelligence first of all. It's like something like chess playing. If you are quite qualified in the life and situations surrounding you and some situations, person uh, can't avoid noticing that everything um, happens again and again from time to time, and logically depends one situation from another. And if you can logically get to know the links between the situations, you can predict your nearest future, and it is very useful just to win some parts of life.
Okay, yeah, that's a fair assessment. Denise, what do you think? What do you think are these advantages? What would you say the advantages are? Are they just survivalistic in nature, or is there something
Uh,
more?
Very general answer. It's a prediction of future is a very important thing to keep less stressed, because if something changes and you are not ready for such change and you not understand what happens, uh, human or animal become stressed. And prediction of future, especially right prediction of future, is a better way to keep less stressed and to keep to be more
Denise,
prepared.
I'm just gonna correct you real quick. Stressed is one
Stress,
syllable.
stress.
Stressed, yes, stressed, yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
So it's a very useful thing. In more human viewpoint, it's a first. It's a yes. Be prepared to some changes to try to understand process. And one of the big advantages to predict the future, you should look around. You should understand process around better to understand current and now process better. So prediction of future is requires a better understanding of nowadays of things we
Yeah.
have.
Definitely. No, that definitely makes sense. I don't know. I think about, again, the advantages of looking ahead to the future. I think that it really comes back to what you were saying, initially about you know, why you think people try to predict the future, and it's because we want to know that we're going to be okay, right? And we're going to have the good job, we're going to have the good life. And I think that is an advantage, because there are maybe some people who don't think so much about the future. I think if you take, for example, young people, teenagers, right? There are basically two types of teenagers. There are teenagers who are doing well in school and are thinking about where they are going to be in the future. And there are those that are just kind of living their lives as they are, right? And, I think it's really interesting. You've got such a divide too. I mean, and it's of course not a complete and clear indicator. Not everyone who goes to university is going to be successful. Not everyone who doesn't go to university is not going to be successful. And that's pretty much the case anywhere in the world. I mean, there's so many external factors. But if you look at people who are thinking about the future, they do tend to do better because they present themselves with more opportunities and more options to be successful. So I would say that that's probably really one of like the key advantages. It's giving yourself the options or the understanding that there are alternatives, that there are options. I think this is kind of a interesting way to look at it. Do you think there are any disadvantages of looking ahead to the future, Denise? Any disadvantages?
Hmm. For me, it's hard to find any disadvantages, but probably it's some some predictions. Probably it's possible to use some predictions to manipulate by people, to manipulate by social opinion. Also, it's more about previous questions that some in literature, not in philosophy, some predictions is a good way not really to predict future, but to highlight some current process, to make it more simple to understand, to make it more separated probably from current now society. And on vice versa, that disadvantage that some people start afraid of this process. Some start afraid of these predictions, but it's not real. It's not real future. It's only some attempts to predict it. It's like history with genetic manipulation. It's not widespread, but many of people afraid it, and it stops very useful things and very useful explorations. The same situation with atomic energy. So some predictions can manipulate by social opinion and change future.
Okay. Do you think it's the actual result of things or is it the thoughts themselves? I mean, there is a difference, isn't there?
Please repeat. Probably it's not clear for me.
Okay. Do you think that these disadvantages, is it the prediction itself that's a disadvantage, or is it the fact that the predictions that have been made have come true is the disadvantage? I mean, what do you think?
Disadvantage is how people to perceive, how people to understand some predictions, because some people afraid predictions that it's only concept, it's not a real future, and sometimes it's really impossible. But them afraid it, and it's close some really good abilities.
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. What do you think, Elia? Do you think of any disadvantages of looking ahead to the future?
Yes, I think there are some disadvantages, as Denise has already mentioned, that predicting the future makes less stress on one hand. But on the other hand, if you make some predictions and if that predictions are not very good for you, for example, that this situation is not very good, and you know the facts that will lead to some catastrophe, for example, or things like that, that everything goes not in very good way, and you will get stressed and you will get a lot of fear. And if you are not able to make that predictions, there will be a chance, or you can be lucky to avoid that sense of fear, and just not understanding that bad things, everything could be much better at the end. So I don't know whether I explained that clearly, but sometimes and very often we say it like lucky. Just sometimes it is lucky not to know everything and not to think about that, and it is easier to avoid some stress and to solve some problems.
Yeah, no, that I understand what you mean. Like kind of that innocence or that protection from that. I mean, that kind of I think I know what you're talking about. I don't know when I think about disadvantages of looking ahead to the future. I think the disadvantage that I maybe see is that we're not focusing enough on what's happening now. I mean, I think if you can take maybe politicians as a good example of this. Politicians who are talking about how they have plans for the future. They're maybe saying that there is, I don't even know how you would say it, but like when they put so much into what they're talking about, that they're talking about doing things in the future, and as a result of talking about what's going to happen in the future, what will be in the future, they're ignoring what's going on now. They're ignoring the problems that should be tackled now. And I think that is a disadvantage. And I'm talking about that, okay, for example, using political campaigns as an example. But I think that even regular people are oftentimes guilty of that. When we'll say that, phrase, tomorrow is another day. Well, it is. It is another day. But how exactly is embracing that fact, which is a fact, maybe creating more problems for that tomorrow because the problem of today hasn't been solved before tomorrow comes. I don't know. So I think that maybe that is a disadvantage of thinking too much about the future, of looking ahead too much to the future by not doing enough now, which is, again, maybe if you look too at environmental issues that the planet is faced with today. For how many years did we create waste? Did we not manage waste properly? Were we polluting? And that still goes on today. And I think that now, you're seeing more and more of these negative effects that this pollution that mankind has created, that wasn't thinking about it. Oh, well, maybe because they weren't predicting about the future, it's possible. Maybe because they didn't think it mattered because it was the future. I don't know. But I think that we as humans are really evolving in our understanding of, what needs to be done, not just in the future, but now to ensure that we have a future. So I think that that's maybe a disadvantage of looking too much into the future. It's not doing enough now. But hopefully we're at a time in our evolution as responsible, beings of this universe that we understand where that is. What do you think that, okay, this is maybe kind of, again, getting into something a bit bigger, but do you think that the predictions that are made and are distributed widespread might end up influencing what actually happens in the future? Denise, do you think that that is something, I mean, science fiction, when science fiction becomes science fact, science reality, do you think that these predictions do have that influence? What do you think?
I think it's directly not, because it's usually science fiction based on some science facts or science theories, but not vice versa. I don't know any example when some experiments or some direction for research was chosen generally inspired by science fiction. But in more common viewpoint, yes, some predictions influenced on future. It's like predictions of climate change influenced on some limits for industry, and for example, predictions of possible problems with genetic manipulations limit using of some agricultural things much, or some experiments much. But it's hard to separate from other actual process.
Okay, yeah.
It's only probably some good predictions can inspire people to become a scientist or become engineer or become some other choose other directions or professions that can maintain future. It's more a thin thing, but yes, on such side I think it's influenced.
Okay, yeah. I mean that does make sense. I mean, yeah, the sort of influence that we have. What do you think, Edia? Do you think that those predictions influence the reality of what comes in the future?
I think, of course, they influence because anytime and anyway, first comes the idea in every project. So, and that very idea then comes true or not comes true. So, but at first we've got idea. So, you've got idea of something, then you will write, for example, science fiction books, and others do some researches, but in both cases first there was an idea. Maybe because, but science fiction is a bit faster because it is maybe a bit easier to write a book than to make research.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. I don't know. I think there are a lot of things that I think about when it comes to that sort of thing, and these predictions that are made and everything else. And I don't know. I think about a lot of the things that I thought would be so neat if there were. This was years ago. When I was still a child. Oh, how neat it would be to have a video on your watch. Like Dick Tracy. You remember, like a video watch. How neat that would be to have. And yet nowadays, children do have watches with videos on them. They can have those. They have video watches. It's completely normal. And they work. They're functioning. It's not a toy. It's real. It's amazing. Or how neat it would be to have the ability to check your email everywhere and not have to have a phone line and dial up to check your email. Again, we all have these in our smartphones. So I think that in some ways, these predictions that you maybe see in science fiction films. I mean, I remember Star Trek. If you remember watching Star Trek, they had their touch screen tablets and things like that were controlling the spaceship, which is basically exactly what we have now with iPads and tablets and smartphones. In a way, that sort of creativity, that sort of, wow, look at how it can be. And there it is. It's just your imagination. It has managed to become reality. So I think that it almost, in many ways, those instances of popular culture where it makes something so neat, something that we so much want, it almost pushes the scientists and the developers to make that creativity happen, and because it's spread through mass media or through, popular culture, through these films and shows and everything else that we watch, we really kind of put pressure on scientists and inventors to actually make it happen. So I don't know. I think it is kind of interesting, and I think it does definitely happen. Getting back to, I guess, science fiction in general, do you enjoy science fiction? Elliot, do you enjoy it?
It depends on each exact science fiction, but in general, yes, I like science fiction, especially when it is really interesting and philosophical and some something deep cases. Yes, generally I like it.
Okay. All right. And Denise, what about you? Do you enjoy science fiction?
Yes, of course. It's one of my favorite kind of literature. But that was a very simple 10 or probably slightly big years ago. But now I find that for me, the most part of science fiction is simply fiction. And most of old science fiction books become a fiction now because we know that most of things are impossible or meaningless or something like this. And now appeared some new directions, a hard fiction, but it's not close to literature. It's more about scientific literature, probably.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean that.
But yeah, some classic scientific science fiction books. It's a very inspiring thing.
Yeah. No, I mean I do. I enjoy that sort of thing. I think that I somehow enjoy films and television shows that deal with science fiction more than books. And I don't know why it is. I think that it's probably because I really am fascinated by seeing, that sort of thing, to kind of, again, like getting back to that previous question, making that sort of demand for the touch screen spaceship control center. That's something that, Star Trek has definitely said is going to be possible. So I think that's the sort of thing. And reading books, I mean, personally, when I read science fiction books, it's hard for me to put that sort of concept into my mind. And I think what I do, and in the instances that I have, for example, there have been some science fiction books that I've read before they became movies. And the way that I saw things were so much different than how they were, made into movies that, again, I think it's just yeah, it's a different sort of thing. And I don't know, my sort of future in technology and innovation would be very different than, I guess, the reality of how things are shown in the films and how those inventors are using what those inventors are using for their basis to actually make it reality. So, but in any case, I do enjoy science fiction. How do you think that science fiction influences science fact? Denise, how do you think that science fiction influences science fact? What influence would you say it has?
What is science fact? It's
Science fact is like basically what is. It is fact. It is. Yeah.
I think it's nothing. It's only I repeat my answer to one of previous questions. To my mind, it's impossible to really change some science fact because science fact is what we know about world around us, and it's we can change some physics of world, but in more bypass way, science fiction can inspire people, can probably point on some directions. But for me, it's hard to find uh, cases when science fiction point on something because the most thing really change nearest future was missed by most of science fiction literature. Of course, smartphones was described something like this only in Star Trek, but for most other worlds and books, there was a stationary computers, stationary video phones, stationary holographical phones. The same with internet, the same with probably, yes, genetic modifications was described like some uncontrolled mutations, but not a very teeny change that can affect on specific situations much. So to my mind, it's some very teeny thing.
Okay. Edit, what about you? What do you think? Do you think that the science fiction is influencing what we have as facts? Do you think that there is an influence on that?
I wouldn't say that science fiction will influence the science, of course. I think this is maybe more correct to say that science fiction influence marketing and sales, making popular some things, maybe not making but helping to then in future to sell something. Case, yes, it may be used, but of course not science fiction influenced the science.
Okay. I don't know. I think that maybe I think they're kind of related. I do. I think that it's hard to isolate the two completely. I think that part of what science fiction is, as I was saying, it's that imagination, it's those ideas. And when you have those ideas, I think it kind of makes you maybe sort of push to see some of those ideas come through, or maybe even prevent some other ones. So I think that it's good. And it's, again, one of those things that makes us people, makes us human, that we're able to expand upon things and think about things and brainstorm. And I think that brainstorming function of humans is very important towards us further evolving. What do you think about the future, Elia? What are your predictions for the future?
It is a very difficult question. I think that the future will be the same as the past, as everything repeats, only in different modifications, but the whole sense will be the same for all the time. So I think that there are some initial things they are unchangeable. They are certain for every time. So maybe we will understand much more things and prove maybe some things, but initially the life will be the same.
Okay, yeah, that's good, comforting. Things will stay the same. Denise, what do you think? What do you think the future will bring?
I very like concept of historical singularity. Idea is that progress grows faster and faster, and probably at one time all way we trying to use to predict future to describe social and technological process become totally unusable. One of the possible point of such singularity is to appearing some artificial intelligent enhancement for human brain, because we have some limitations for our cognitive functions, for our perceptions, and using some artificial intelligent features can remove such borders. And how it affects on science, on ability to understand, the ability to explore, we don't know. So it's very interesting conception, and it's probably some game breaker in history, if it appears, of course. But it's very hard to predict. It's only like a philosophical concept. And for more close future, as I write in my text, for me it's very interesting point appearing and using of weak artificial intelligence, because we don't know if it's possible to create a full general artificial intelligence in the nearest closest future, but we already created and use weak artificial intelligence, and how it change economy, how it change social process, and very interesting questions. And it's also closer than full industry automatizations or real human-like robots. It's accused now.
It's what now? It's accused?
It's accused
Execute.
now. No, okay. It's existed now. It's affects now.
Okay, yeah, it is now. Okay, yeah, it exists now. It's here now. That's right. Yeah, definitely. I think about the future, predictions for the future. I don't know. I hope we're all still here, that, there hasn't been some sort of ecological disaster, that, we've destroyed the planet for ourselves. I think that's something that, there's always a possibility. But I think that the future, as long as we keep on doing what we're doing, I think that we should be okay. But we definitely have to just be more aware. And I think that the reality of the situation that we see now is making us understand that we are responsible for the future. And I think that if you maybe look 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, we were talking about how, we were debating this and giving examples of how animals have an understanding of the future and everything else. But like really 200, 300, 400 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, did people think about the future as we think about the future these days? And I think that that's something that we're probably going to see even more of in the future, is people thinking more about the future. Maybe not so much making predictions, but being concerned. And that concern, I think, will lead to not just predictions, but to solutions, to active implementation of systems that are designed to sustain us as people now and in the future. So I think that it's an interesting time that we live in. I think that every day, every year, every decade, however you want to look at it, we're becoming more aware of the responsibility that we have for the future. So it's not maybe so much prediction, but it's more like responsibility. It's more like using the resources that we have to better ensure that this future is going to be someplace where we can live, where we want to live. And again, if you look at, so much of the science fiction, that's maybe something that's also made us think about how important it is, because we have thought of these worst case scenarios, and we definitely don't want to see those happen. So I think that that's something that, the future is going to see a lot more of, a lot more concern for the future. I think that's my prediction. Are there any predictions that you've heard about the future that you're looking forward to? Denise, anything?
Yes. I'm looking forward to many predictions in biology and medicine, because there is many research now with trying to understand the process in human body in details on very low level, and it's possible in some not so close, but in some future, to create a full model of human body, human brain, and this allow us to increase ability to cure disease, to cure some genetic problems, to provide ability for all people be more healthy and live more time. So it's one of the things I'm looking
Okay.
forward to.
So you're looking at those medical advancements, that
Yes.
sort of, extending of human life. I mean, I think we already do see a lot of those, though. I mean, if you look at a lot of the medications that exist that are able to prolong lives, and I think that, looking around, for example, in the US, you see that there is a big difference, because I lived in Russia for a long time, and I know that, there's a different medical healthcare system and everything else. But in the US, I mean, for a good 20 or 30 years now, there have been so many different medicines that have been given to people that I think have prolonged lives. I mean, there is a longer life expectancy in the US, but there also are an unbelievable number of medications, drugs, this modern medicine, this science, this sort of age of the future that people take on a regular basis. So I think that, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Denise, and I think that a lot of it is already kind of happening today. And, it's a matter of it becoming more widespread to see how exactly that's all going to function, and see what the positive components of that are, and see what the side effects are too. Because I think that if you look at a lot of different examples, there are certainly side effects that, again, maybe weren't known about when these projects were started 20 or 30 years ago. But no, that's a very interesting thing, because modern medicine and advancements in medicine are definitely something that are interesting. Elia, what about you? Are there any predictions that you've heard about that you've been looking forward to?
I quite agree with Denise that, of course, medicine is very important, and it is very good if we human beings will able to use all their abilities to live. As far as I remember, a human being can live for 300 years. So, biologically, in
What? Oh my gosh.
theoretically, yes. As far as I remember, if I'm not a liar. And it's one point, and another point, and of course, to solve all that problems with genetic hormones, which can happen with our children, unfortunately, that very things with cancer, with AIDS, and another maybe less important but also very admirable thing for me is just to invent such perfect robots who can help, who can be programmable and helpful in everyday routine in household. So that is my
Okay, you want Rosie the robot from the Jetsons, right? You remember Rosie
yes,
the
but
robot?
not that stupid things which we have now, but perfectly useful, small, clever, some system which can really help you.
Okay, yeah. Do you know who Rosie the robot is? Do you know who this is, Elia?
Yes, it is called
Y- That
Домработница today,
what?
but uh, in Russia it is called Домработница. Yes, when I don't know what is it in English, just house, mm,
Like
house helper.
helper? Yes. Okay,
Yes,
okay.
but this is
Yeah.
something like human being, yes, and
Yes.
we should pay money for her, and she or
So
he
yeah,
use
you want Rosie, you want the maid. This is it.
maid, yes, and
Yes, you want it.
it is usually it is she has got her own problems, her periods, her family, and things like that, and in perfect case, it is better to avoid that everything and just to program and to get the result.
Okay. Well, that is something to look forward to. That is something to look forward to. I don't know. I still want flying cars, which I guess aren't, physically possible, considering aerodynamics and everything else just isn't quite that. But I still would like a flying car. That's one thing. You guys have got great ideas, and I think that we've really discussed a lot of interesting points today. Can you think of anything that you just definitely don't want to see? Any predictions for the future that you don't want to see? Anything? For example, I don't want those microchips in people. I don't want that, and that is coming, isn't it? But that's like the sort of prediction that there is, that everything, all of your information is going to be in your arm, and you can just scan your arm. And I don't know, for me, like, that is something I am not okay with. My dog has a microchip in his neck, and I saw how that thing was programmed or reprogrammed remotely, and it really, I don't know. That to me really, it's very nervous. I don't want to see that happen. I don't want to see that happen. That's my sort of one thing I don't want to see. How about you guys?
It's hard because it's very. There are many predictions and many things which can happens, and I decided. But for example, about chips. Yes, chips itself it's not a good thing, but if on other side, its chips provide an ability to monitor your health and provide a better statistic to doctor and to provide help in some situations. Emergency, for example.
I don't want to give that information. I don't know. I just don't feel like
It's
that's something.
It's a situation like a mobile phone. A mobile phone can be a spy.
I know.
Yes, and it's not prevent us to get mobile phone everywhere. So
True.
yes, it's more.
But I can still turn it off, and I don't have to take it everywhere, and it's not inside my body. I guess that's the difference. It's not inside my body.
It's very close to your body, so
it is very close. It's like.
The next step, yes, it's a partial integration of phone, and it's provide new abilities and provide new risks. So it's more, for me, it's more about some social probably process, like if some thing become uncontrolled for most people, like now we have some not effective but some way to control government, not for all, in our countries, but for some countries there is ability to control governments, to control some I don't know how to what is right, some departments like FSB in Russia, FBR, or in US. And if such departments become uncontrolled, this ability to use high edge technologies, it's very bad thing for society. So most of my fear is about social effects and social thing.
That's a legitimate fear. Elia, what about you? Anything that you can say that you are a bit concerned about?
I really afraid of artificial intelligence, that very, because I think it is really very possible, and I think in a very close future. And I'm afraid that there could be a mixture of very high-level artificial intelligence with very bad patient.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, this has been an interesting conversation. It certainly has been. Do we have any ideas for next time? Any suggestions for next time? Any predictions for next time?
I have no, sorry.
What about language? The theme, for example, is English a foreign language or international language, something like that? What do you think?
I guess that works. that works. We can talk about language, about maybe international languages, foreign languages. Yeah, that could be an interesting topic. I don't know. How do you think, Denise?
Yes. Some features, advantages, and disadvantages.
Okay, sounds good.
Good.
Sounds good. All right, we can do that. We can do that. All right, guys. So same time, same day, 1 week from now.
Yes.
All right. See you in the future.
Thank you very much.
All
See
right.
you.
Goodbye, you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.